Thanks for staying with us. Now, while the focus has been on former UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his successor Keir Starmer, the focus is also on whether or not Starmer's government will be able to bring much needed change and address some of the issues faced by many in the country. Now, there's another candidate, though, who also made headlines here at home as well, Andrew Feinstein, and he's no stranger to politics. A former MP, Feinstein challenged Starmer in the Holborn and St Pancras constituency in London, and UK independent candidate for Holborn and St Pancras, Andrew Feinstein, joins us live now. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Let's start with, why was it important for you to run as an independent candidate?
Thanks so much. It's very good to be with you. So, I resigned from Parliament in South Africa as an ANC MP after President Mbeki refused to allow a full and unfettered investigation into our arms deal. And when I first went into Parliament in South Africa, President Mandela had said to us on a number of occasions that the moment at which we think we are more important than the people we represent is the point at which we are no value to those people or to our country. And unfortunately, the situation in politics in Britain, the situation in politics in much of the world, is that MPs are no longer representative of their communities. They're no longer accountable to those communities. And in many ways, in so-called Western countries, we have the best democracies money can buy, because politics and money have become so intertwined. Money has so corrupted politics. And Keir Starmer, my own MP, where I've lived for the 23 years I've been in the UK, is really emblematic of all of that. So that's one of the primary reasons that I've done it. But the other reason has to do with Gaza and the fact that Starmer, as my MP, a former human rights lawyer, has refused to call for an unqualified ceasefire in Gaza, has refused to call for a halt to British arms sales to Gaza, which are, in my opinion, illegal in terms of British law and international law. So I really just wanted to give people a choice in my own constituency as part of a wider group of independent candidates standing who are fed up with the two main parties, the Conservatives and Labour, who in this election offered basically the same thing. So I suppose those are the primary reasons that I did it.
And I suppose then, just to segue, into another question then, because listening to what you're saying, the divide and the gap that seems to now be, between the people as well as those who are elected to represent them. There are some who are saying that Starmer, for example, represents a shift in politics. He's calling himself a force for unity. Listening to you, I suppose you disagree?
Well, this is a person who we've had for 9 years as our MP, and he's been a force for disunity. He's been a force for a real shift to the right in the Labour Party. He became leader of the Labour Party by making 10 pledges and claiming he was the continuity candidate after Jeremy Corbyn, his predecessor. And he then, in the space of just a few weeks or months, he reversed. He made U-turns on every single one of those pledges that he had committed to as leader. So he's regarded, as one of the most mendacious politicians we've ever seen in the United Kingdom. And given we fairly recently had someone like Boris Johnson as our prime minister, that's really saying something. His manifesto was called A Force for Change, and it actually signaled absolutely no change. It offers the same permanent austerity and forever wars that the Conservatives have offered, and also the sort of climate catastrophe and socioeconomic suffering that comes from that. So it's almost Orwellian, the way in which the words he uses actually mean exactly the opposite to what he says. And that's part of the problem. And, the reality is, and I'm sorry to put it so brutally, but I remember a time when, I was living in South Africa growing up, and I'd occasionally come to Britain with my parents when I was a teenager. And if you lied to Parliament, that was the end of your political career. Now it seems, unless you're a very good liar and you lie constantly, you can't even think about a career in politics. And I think that is fundamentally wrong. And I think that it shows just how broken our politics are, not just in Britain, but in most of the world. And that was really reflected in the election, where it was the smallest voter turnout in British history since universal suffrage has been introduced in this country. And even though the Labour Party won an overwhelming majority in terms of seats, only about 21% of people who could actually have voted in the UK voted for them, which is a tiny amount of people. And in his own constituency, this was the first time in British electoral history that someone was elected to serve in 10 Downing Street, when his own personal majority in his own constituency went down considerably.
Yeah.
So his vote went from 36,000 to 18,000, and his majority from over 27,000 to 11,000. So he himself is deeply unpopular. And I think the only reason people voted Labour at all was to get rid of the Conservatives who've been in power for so long. But the real reality is that the establishment, the people who run British politics, know that having Starmer in power is actually going to make absolutely no difference. He's as much a part of the establishment as Rishi Sunak was.
And I suppose then, one can then maybe cast our eyes to the United States, for example, today. We're hearing about the fact that, the Republican National Committee, and these are live visuals there as we're waiting for this convention to then kick off, that they're going to be naming Trump, for example, as the official candidate. And you look at what happened at the weekend, you look at what happened in France as well. What does this tell us about the trend that is emerging as far as politics is concerned?
I think it's very clear. 2024, the year of elections in South Africa, we've already had our elections. It was the biggest blow to the ANC since our liberation in 94. I think what we're seeing, the fact that Donald Trump and Joe Biden, who really doesn't seem to be in any fit sort of state to run for office, let alone to serve as president again, let alone to have his finger on the button of a nuclear arsenal. The fact that it's two such appalling candidates as Trump and Biden yet again, as we had 4 years ago, if this is the most powerful country on the planet, as it claims to be, if this is the most important democracy in the world, then the world is in a lot of trouble. And similarly in France, we have a situation in France where the left, a coalition of left forces, have triumphed over another centrist government that did absolutely nothing for ordinary people, did loads for its billionaire donors. And this is the problem. Our politicians have become reflective of the people who fund them. They're supposed to represent us, the people, but instead they represent this tiny, tiny group of billionaires whose interests are actually the diametric opposite to the needs of the vast majority of people in our countries. And I think what all of these election trends tell us is that the vast, vast majority of people, where we are lucky enough to live in democracies, the vast, vast majority are completely dissatisfied with the nature, form, and functioning of our democracies and the governments that leads us with.
You are a former ANC MP. You've alluded to it just a little bit in your previous response, but let's talk about your views on this government of national unity and the ANC's performance in the recent elections.
Look, I think obviously to see, a liberation movement of which I was part, really having its weakest electoral performance, tells you something profound, and it tells you that a huge number of people in South Africa are totally dissatisfied with the ANC in government. I think levels of corruption, levels of crime, the ongoing power crisis, the fact that inequality in our country in South Africa continues to get worse and worse. These are all things that are suggesting that people in South Africa feel that perhaps their government is not representing their best interests. I think what is also quite sad to me is that, we have a government of national unity, which in general terms is a good thing if you're wanting to address urgent critical situations, which I think in South Africa, we've needed that for a long time, having emerged from the awfulness of state capture under Jacob Zuma. Obviously, there's a feeling that President Ramaphosa hasn't done nearly enough to right the wrongs that were done under Jacob Zuma to sort out day-to-day governance. But I'm not sure going into a coalition with the party that in the rest of the world would be regarded as center-right as your main coalition partner is really a signal that gives hope to people who most need a strong, accountable, honest, well-functioning government that is committed to justice and equality and the better life for all, as President Mandela used to say repeatedly. I think that, the sense that you get is, oh my goodness, now we have a government of national unity that is a government of vested interests. And this is the bottom line problem of our democracies, is that where the representatives of the people should serve the people's interests, they're serving the interests of the extremely wealthy, of corporations. They are not serving the interests of the vast majority of South Africans. And, it gives me no pleasure to say that South Africa is not alone in this. I mean, the two countries where I can vote, South Africa and the United Kingdom, there's absolutely nobody that I get particularly enthused about voting for. And that's one of the reasons I stood for election here. I think that the nature of our politics and our politicians is declining at an incredibly alarming rate. And I think we need to reset our politics. We need to reconsider what democracy looks like. Most importantly of all, we need to get money out of politics. President Mandela used to tell us when we were in office that serving one's community, that serving as a representative of the people was the highest honor that you could receive, but that you had to do that with honesty, with total commitment, and you had to be a servant to the people, not see it as an opportunity to become wealthy yourself, not see it as an opportunity to serve the interests of your extremely wealthy donors. So I think globally, there is this need for a reset of politics. And in Britain, the way we're going about doing that is by starting to create, first locally and then nationally, grassroots, mass-based democratic movements that we hope will change the structure and functioning of our politics.
We end off on a very interesting note there, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time. And certainly money and politics is another conversation altogether, especially given what we've seen, transpire in recent times. But thank you so much for your time. Do appreciate it. That was a UK independent candidate for Holborn and St Pancras, Andrew Feinstein. He's also a former ANC MP as well as an investigative author and activist.